Will a carbon offset credit program give big emitters a license just to pay to pollute? These things have backfired before. And does a voluntary program, can it really have a significant effect? Let's find out. Joining me now, the Environment Minister, Steven Guilbeault. He joins us from the Summit of the Americas meeting in Los Angeles. Good to have you back on the program.
Thank you, Evan.
Can you explain a bit about this offset program? There's already a way for industrial emitters in Canada to buy and sell carbon credits, right, using other companies covered by the federal carbon pricing scheme. This expands that. So explain to people how this works.
So basically, as you rightly pointed out, we have a carbon pricing system that applies to large emitters of greenhouse gas in Canada. But you have a number of entities, say, for example, municipalities, farmers, Indigenous communities, that aren't subject to carbon pricing, but that may want to participate. So it's a voluntary system where they can invest in programs. The classic project would be a municipality investing to capture methane emission from landfill sites. Methane's a very powerful greenhouse gas. You can capture it. You can use it to do other things, such as electricity, for example. So instead of sending into the atmosphere a very powerful greenhouse gas, you capture it. This has a value. And in terms of dollars per ton of CO2 reduction, which they can sell to companies that will want to use this to meet some of their regulatory obligations.
Right. I want people to understand that. That's the whole purpose of an offset. You know, if a company has obligations, but they can't themselves reduce their own emissions, they buy a carbon offset, as you say. They pay a municipality if the municipality could do it. You and I both know that there are real concerns about carbon offset programs. I spoke today to Michael Bernstein from Sustainable Prosperity, and as you know, the argument has been that they have actually led to increased emissions in the past, not decreased. I'll give you an example on what he said. Offsets are purchased, as Michael Bernstein told me, by companies to avoid reducing their emissions directly, but offsets aren't credible because it's hard to validate that the companies wouldn't have acted anyway. Like, this is a best practice, we'll do it anyway, so it's not the offset that did it. And some actions that generate these aren't permanent, so the CO2 that you're trying to capture escapes later on, right? Forests and land-based offsets are particularly vulnerable. So basically, is this not a risk that these actually offset programs aren't that great because you don't know if they're that effective?
Well, I would agree that we have to be careful and that we have to put in place a robust system to ensure that where a company or an organization claims that a CO2 credit has been generated, that it has in fact been generated, which is why there will be third-party verification as part of the Canadian system, that we will be looking at the permanence of these emission reduction. And in fact, in a way, I mean, we have the benefit of looking at what some other jurisdictions have done, namely the European Union, for example. California has had a system in place, an offset system in place since 2011. So we've obviously looked and we've spoken with the officials from these jurisdictions to ensure, I think we can agree that there was some mistakes were made in some instances. So we have the benefit of the experience of others to ensure that our system is robust and will lead to real emission reduction.
Okay, but you've seen it in the past. Like Alberta, remember they had the offset for farmers for no-till practices. You could adopt that and you get it. Saskatchewan didn't have it. Turns out that it was just a best farming practice, so nobody knows if actually the offset actually worked. And there are a lot of examples of that. I guess the question is, and again, it's hard to verify how these things work. It's hard to verify if they were needed. It's hard to verify if they're permanent emissions reductions, as some of these won't. So I just ask you again, how do Canadians know, even for this third-party verification, if this is actually going to work and how effective is it going to be?
I think some of the tools we have that some may not have had, say, 10 years ago, is technology has really evolved quite a bit. When talking about methane emissions, for example, we now have companies, including Canadian companies, that do satellite methane detection and that they can detect methane leaks at the level of a plant from the atmosphere. So we're working with some of these companies. So we have now much better tools to be able to see what's happening on the ground, which in the past we had to rely on either computer modeling, or assumptions that were made. Now we have those technological tools that can be at our disposal to help us do that and do that right.
Okay, some might say, I just want people to understand this because these are the concerns, that this is an incentivizing essentially to pay to pollute. You know, you don't want to reduce emissions, so your steel plant or whatever you want to do, you are essentially incentivizing people to pay to pollute.
I would look at it from the other way around. I mean, until our government came in, pollution was free in Canada. And we started putting a price on pollution. And this system continues this. So you have to pay to reduce those emissions. Pollution is no longer free in Canada. Now, I guess the question is, you know, could a company, large, you talked about steel, for example. So big steel company, could they decide to simply pay others to reduce their emissions instead of doing it themselves? Theoretically, they could. Is this a very viable long-term business model when you're paying everyone else to be efficient and to invest in new technology, whereas you're not doing it yourself as a company? Your shareholders would probably tell you, well, listen, we'll go and put our money somewhere else because you're paying other people to reduce emissions. And what we've seen around the world where jurisdictions have used this is that companies will do a lot internally. They'll invest in efficiency and innovation and new technologies to reduce their emissions. But sometimes, and let me just finish on this, Evan. Sometimes they're not able to reduce everything they need internally. So then they'll complement to comply with the regulation. They'll complement that with offsets.
The other worry is what they call carbon leakage. Like a company says, this is too onerous, the offsets are too expensive. I'm just going to move to another jurisdiction. I'm going to leave Canada. I'm out. I'm going to go across the border to the U.S. What do you say to that?
Well, we've had carbon pricing in place in Canada since 2019. That simply hasn't happened. The European Union has carbon pricing. China now has carbon pricing. South Korea. There are more than 65, 70 jurisdictions around the world that have carbon pricing. Parts of the U.S. do, not at the federal level, but there are a number of states, U.S. states, that have pricing mechanisms. Right. This week, the president of Chile was in Canada talking to the prime minister about their interest in adopting Canada's pricing system. So it's not just in Canada or the European Union, but it's becoming more and more a global phenomenon.
Just two things. This is voluntary, so there's going to be a question of how much compliance you'll get in voluntary. But I also want to ask you, while you're there, you're in California. I understand California and Canada are going to have some deal on, is it offsets? Can you give us a hint of what the announcement's going to come?
Well, I can't. It's happening tomorrow morning with the governor of California, Governor Newsom, and the prime minister. Right. But we've had a long history of collaboration. I mean, California has been a real beacon in terms of environmental protection, fighting climate change for many, many years, electrification of transportation. We've been working with them. We want to increase that collaboration between Canada and California.
Okay, can I just ask you as the environment minister? They have a water shortage. They've got a serious drought. Are they asking for Canadian water? I just want to, is that on the table?
That not in any of the conversations I've had, no.
All right, just something, that's something we all got to look out for because they have a serious drought down there. Environment and Climate Change Minister Steven Guilbeault, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Evan.